I'd rather not allude to your past.
Too Clever by Half is a play written by Alexandr Ostrovsky in 1868, and the subtitle of the play sometimes is The Diary of a Scoundrel. We've decided to call it a savagely funny comedy, and the reason we've come at that is because I think it's at times riotously funny, which is why we were drawn to it, but it's quite brutal. So the comedy comes at sometimes from quite humiliating, dark places for the characters, which makes it, in a sense, much more interesting, because you're laughing 1 second and then going, oh, that's awful. The sort of comedy of pain, which I think we are used to, even in things very different, things like The Office and stuff like that, where you think, oh my God, I can't believe he's done that or she's doing that. It follows the story of Glumov, a young man with his mother and their servant, and they're basically a trio of con artists, basically. And he decides to trick his way through Moscow society by basically tricking the older members of society, these wealthy bourgeois people who are Ostrovsky describes them as being a gallery of grotesques. They're this sort of self-obsessed people that he manages to trick, and at the same time as tricking them, he keeps a diary, and then ultimately the diary gets discovered. So the fun of the play is watching how extraordinarily audacious he is in tricking these people. I think the thing that I really want to stress is that even though it is a play that perhaps people don't know, the title suggests hopefully it's going to be a good evening, Too Clever by Half. It's a really accessible comedy. That's why we've chosen it. We like to make theatre that is inventive and wild and anarchic, but something that appeals to a really wild audience. And the way that we've set this and the way that we've worked on it with me and Laura, the designer, I think it's something that people could really connect with in Manchester. Because it's a play a lot of people don't know, and it was written in 1868, we felt that we wanted to find an equivalent period that would unlock certain things in the play and maybe make it slightly more contemporary or accessible for an audience. So we were looking at it, and then we sort of thought, well, what about looking at a period roughly 100 years after it was written? So looking at late 1960s, early 70s, a time when the young were challenging the establishment, a time when the old ideas were being, so it felt like a really good connected time in a sense, a time when a lot of young people were suddenly finding their voice, and society was slightly shaking and tottering a bit. And then also on a visual level, we looked at lots of sort of images of that period, sort of late 60s, sort of quite flamboyant, psychedelic sort of pictures of Cecil Beaton and David Hockney and their sort of... And we thought, well, actually, in some ways, it's not a million miles away from the look of some of these characters from that period. It also unlocked fantastic opportunities with music, of course. So I think we've settled on a brilliant soundtrack of music, which I think people will, some of which people recognise, some of which they won't. Of course, we are doing the play. We're not changing the play, but for us, it works very well in that period, and I think it means that when people immediately come into the theatre, there's a connection to an older play without going, oh, okay, there's a samovar and we're in 1860s Russia, because I think the worry with that is that you potentially have a slight barrier that people have to overcome, whereas with this, I think immediately, hopefully, people connect with the characters in the world.
After all, I'm quite pretty. I want to be admired. Oh, surely there must be someone in Moscow. Can you ask one of your friends?
I think there's some reasons why maybe it's not as well known as a lot of Russian plays are here. I think some people consider it slightly too Russian, although I don't quite see that. I think the notion of the play being about the problem of honesty in a lying, hypocritical world, for me, feels very universal. As a company, we're always drawn to plays where we see the possibility for exploding a physical language out of the situation. So it's not about imposing something on top of it, but we look at a play where there are extreme comic situations and we think there's a possibility here to take that further in what happens physically, what happens visually in terms of the design. So I suppose what we've done with this, some of it is by transposing the setting, some of it is by going, well, the situation on the page it might be really awkward for this character. So what we like to try and do is go, can we make it worse? We have a saying in our rehearsals, which sometimes we write on the wall, which is, if it's bad, make it worse. And I think that expression in the whole can make for wonderful comedy. You look at Fawlty Towers, and Fawlty Towers begins with Basil having a bad day, and by the end of the episode he's beating his car with a twig. And Fawlty Towers is not a bad reference. If I was to say to people, what's it like? I'd say you could think of something like Fawlty Towers in terms of these characters desperately trying to keep everything together, you know. What we'll always look to do is to see how far we can take something that already exists. For instance, in the play there's a moment when this middle-aged woman is convinced that the young central character Glumov loves her, and he's tricked her. But so convinced is she of this that we take that slightly further. So we act out a huge fantasy of the moment of the seduction, ultimately ending with the woman being eaten by her own sofa. So it's these things where you go, and the great thing about having those ideas is working somewhere like the Exchange is you can say to the designer and then to the team who are building the set props to go, we'd love a sofa that someone can sit on and then be eaten by.
What a pleasant surprise.
You're all very pale, my dear.
Oh.
Your nerves bad again.
My nerves are in a dreadful state.
We do the play and it all has to come out of the situations of the play, but we're drawn to it, and I suppose our style is something which in some ways comes from life but is bigger than life. Also our style is also about, which is why the play is perfect and the space at the Exchange is perfect, is about a very direct relationship between the performers and the audience. So that we're not trying to pretend that the audience aren't there, we're not pretending that we're not doing a play, we're declaring all of that, and I think it makes, if it's captured in the right way, it makes for a very unique experience for the audience on every night. So the joy of coming to see something and then knowing that actually it will be completely different tomorrow night in many ways.